Hi, it's Paul Bass with GreatDad.com, and today's episode is with Ron Platt, who is the president and founder of an organization called the National Association for Single and Divorced Families. And he has some information on the state of play in divorce in 2026. And it was an interesting conversation, which we'll play just in a second, because some things have not changed at all, and then some things have in the divorce world. We're still at about 50% of marriages end in divorce. It still does have a huge effect on families and on kids. And I think it's important if at any stage of your marriage and family development that you think a little bit about this because marriages have their ups and downs and their cycles, and I think we all want to avoid any potential for divorce, and that means taking off the rose-colored glasses and thinking about what it means. So I hope you enjoy this episode. As always, you can find me at greatdad.com/go for all my coaching offerings. Make sure to like and subscribe if that's what you like to do. Thanks. Hey, it's Paul Bass at GreatDad.com, and I'm here with my weekly series talking about modern fatherhood. And I've got an expert today to talk a little bit about a subject we haven't talked about too much recently, which is divorce. So, welcome, Ron Platt.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate you having me on.
So, Ron, you're the CEO and founder of a group called the National Association for Single and Divorced Families. So, I'm hopeful that we'll be able to talk a little bit about the state of play of modern divorce, and maybe for listeners who are struggling through whether they should get a divorce or anything, kind of set the stage for what divorce looks like today.
Yep.
I guess my first question is that we've always heard about this 50% of marriages end in divorce. And I know part of that is because second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth marriage, sixth time you get married, the potential for divorce is like really, really high. Probably by the time you're married like six or seven times, probably like 99% of them don't last more
I
than a
think you
week.
should quit because clearly you don't know what you're doing.
Right.
It's not the other person, it's you.
But do you know what the statistic is for just every first marriage, what the potential is, what that
It's
data point is?
still 50%.
It's
Uh,
still 50%.
Still 50% of first marriages, 60% of second marriages, and 70% of third marriages end in
Wow.
divorce, which is interesting because you would think the third marriage you've gotten it right or you've taken time out to figure out who that person needs to
Right.
be. But the stats are there. There are actually less marriages happening across the country because as kids are beginning to grow up, they want to postpone it. They want to go to college.
Right.
They want to have their careers. They'd rather live with the person. They're not as commitment focused as,
Yeah.
let's say, you and I might have been. And they're trying something. It doesn't mean they're not in a relationship and they're not living together. They're just postponing marriage.
Yeah. Well, you do hear a lot about people not making or not believing in the traditional idea of marriage, and to my mind, doing something very maybe you're slightly irresponsible is not actually getting married and then raising kids all the way to
And
college.
that I always thought was interesting is that you can commit to a kid for the rest of your life with that person, but you can't
Right.
commit to that person for life.
Right.
So yeah, it's an interesting concept. And so they're delaying marriage, but they're still having children,
Okay. So
which I have no judgment around, of course, but that's just what the stats are.
right, right, yeah. Well, it does surprise me. I thought you were going to say more like 30% of first marriages end in divorce, but if it's 50%, that's a huge number.
Still is. Yeah, I checked recently and it's still pretty much the same. There's 2 million people getting divorced nationally every year, and we have about 26 million currently divorced or single families in the country.
Right.
So it's a pretty good audience of
Yeah.
people.
Yeah. Um, uh, but it does bring up this point about the fact about why people then have a higher divorce rate for the second time around, which, like you say, you'd expect them to say like, no, I'm going to set up real strict criteria. I'm going to avoid, the alcoholic or whatever it was that the first one, the problem of the first one, I'm going to fix all those things. But in my mind, what I've always heard is more like, once you've failed at it once, it's kind of easier to fail at again because you don't have that first time, like, I'm making a commitment for life and I'll never break it. Now you've broken it one time. Why not break it?
Well, there's lots of reasons. And I'm going to make an analogy here. It might be a bad one. When somebody loses a dog that they've had for 14 years and they go the next day, they go out and they get another dog. I'm like, well, where's the mourning time? Like I waited years When my pit bull died, I had to wait. And then it was only because somebody finally said, take the dog. I'm like, okay, right. But so for me, my first long-term relationship was a replica of what my childhood was. I
Hmm.
was loved conditionally. I had to earn my love. So of course, when I go into my first long-term relationship, it's going to be the same. It's going to be conditional love. I need to make more money. I need to do better. I need to be a better person. It's never good enough. I'm always, I remember just having that person put their hand on my lap and it was like, oh, affection, it's like, but that's kind of what I was brought up with to some extent. So I think a lot of us go into our first relationships, our first marriages, predicated on what our childhood upbringing was like. They say women look for men that relate back to their fathers.
Right.
I don't know if I believe in that stat anymore, but because I think women have definitely evolved to a point where they have a clearer vision of what they want. But and again, that's my personal opinion. Uh, we tend to go for people that are comfortable for what the same
Right.
comfort level that we grew up with. So when the second marriage happens, again, like that person who goes out and gets a puppy immediately after the last one dies, it's like we don't give ourselves time to breathe. We don't give ourselves time to reflect. We think it's the other person. And, a lot of times it is the other person, but regardless of whether it is or not, we have responsibility in why that relationship didn't work. And if
Right.
we don't take the time out to analyze what our responsibility was and the reason that that marriage broke up, we're going to repeat it again in the second marriage, and we're going to meet somebody who looks like the person that they just left. And I fell into that category as well. When I finally broke up my crappy relationship, my sister said, don't date anybody for 5 years. I'm like, what? And she's a therapist. And I'm like, what? 5 years? You got to be kidding me. So,
Right.
of course, I immediately go out and I meet somebody. And 3 months into the relationship, I'm like, there's something vaguely resembling this last relationship I had. And it was the same person in a different body. They were
Hmm.
treating me exactly the same way my ex did, but they looked different.
Hmm.
So it was like, but I caught it quicker. And I'm like, no, I don't want to repeat that. I just got out of that. I don't want to repeat it. So what I ended up doing was she was right. I wasn't expecting 5 years, but I took time out to really first work on myself. Why was it that I assumed I should be loved conditionally as opposed to unconditionally? Why didn't I love myself enough to be able to fall in love with somebody that accepts me for who I am, realizes that I'm going to part my hair the wrong way, I'm going to say the wrong thing, but it doesn't come from a place of malice. It comes from a place of love. And we all screw up, and we have to accept each other for those misplaced words or misplaced feelings or whatever emotions that we convey to somebody else. We have to be able to give ourselves some grace, but you need to figure it out. So for me, it was a lot of, I'm a big journaling type of guy. So I journaled a lot of how I wanted to be loved, what I saw in my next partner. When I ask a lot of people, what do you see in your next partner? They tell me what they don't want to see. Like, oh, they can't be this and they can't be that and they can't be, well, so, okay, great. What do you want? And then I get that blank stare because I'd say a majority of the people don't know what they want. And you need to figure that out. So I took the time out to figure it out and I journaled about it and I was very specific. And then a good friend of mine, when I got done with the dating scene, I realized I wanted to be in a relationship again about 3 to 4 years before I ended up meeting my partner. Um, he said, you have to go on an interview process. Every date needs to be like an interview. And I'm like, an interview? What are you talking about? And he says, you know what you want. So you should be able to ask the right questions when you go on a date. For example, you go on a date and you say, so tell me something about yourself. And the person chats away for 15 minutes. If they don't turn around and say, enough about me, tell me about you,
Yeah. Right.
flag.
Right. Right.
It's like, I remember one time I went on a date and for an hour and a half, the guy spoke about himself. And when we got in the car, I was taking him back to the house and he said, what are you doing? I'm like, well, literally for an hour and a half, you spoke about yourself. We're not a match.
Right.
And
Right.
they didn't realize it.
Yeah.
So, and it's not that I need to talk about myself. There has to be a mutual interest,
Right. 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 Right.
right? I went on a date with a friend of mine one time and I shared with him what it was like to go through the interview process. And it was kind of like we were meeting this person for dinner just unexpectedly. And I started engaging the person asking, and I was truly interested in what they were doing for work and who they were. And at one point, the guy turned to me and said, why do I feel like I'm on an interview? And I said, oh, this isn't an interview. It's called getting to know you. And
Not
what you
not
haven't
not
does is
always
ask
done.
anything about me.
Right. Right.
So I got pretty good at it, needless to say, to a point where some of my dates lasted 5 minutes. And, when I would say, so tell me what your longest relationship was. And if they said 6 months and you're 45 years old, I leaned over the table and said, the other person is not the issue. It's you.
Right. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
not a match.
Right. Right.
So my point is that I think a lot of people, they go from one relationship to the next. What I hear a lot of is people saying, I can't be alone. I'm afraid to be alone. And I think that's sad because there's something that happened in the past that puts you in a place where, and by the way, my son falls under this category as well. He's afraid to be alone. And I've often said, why? He goes, well, my thoughts and this. And I'm like, well, what makes you think being in a relationship is going to cure that loneliness? You can still be in a
Well, you
marriage
can
and a
be plenty
relationship.
lonely in a relationship. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's another reason for divorce.
Yeah.
My parents broke up because my father was so business focused that my mother would often be by herself and said, I need a partner,
Yeah.
you know.
So what do we know about the effect of on children? Or is there anything new about the effect on children? I guess my philosophy, and I in my work as a coach and this podcast and other activities, I'm always trying to support people staying together, trying to go the full course. You made a commitment. Obviously, there are cases of abuse and things where all those rules change. But do we know anything more now about whether families, couples should stay together for the sake of the children and battle through things that are the ups and downs of any kind of experience or relationship?
I think kids are very perceptive and
Yeah,
they know when the two aren't getting along.
right,
And when they're faking it a lot of
right.
time. When my parents said I was 16 when my parents said they were getting a divorce, and my sister and I went, thank God,
Yeah,
because I mean, not that it was tumultuous and a lot of screw there, but we knew that it
yeah,
needed to conclude itself. So when they announced it, it was something that was a good thing. But of course, I was 16 and my sister was 21 at the time, so we
very
were
different.
older. I think for younger kids, they pick up on it.
Right,
And sometimes you create a happier environment when you're not together and you allow yourselves to breathe. When my son divorced his partner, uh, they began bickering with each other, but they had a child that they had together,
yeah,
and I had to sit them both down and say, so I know as much as you guys aren't getting along, this has to conclude at some point. You have to figure out how to get along because as much as you think you're not going to be in each other's lives, your daughter is going to keep you there for the rest of your life. So
right.
the quicker you figure out how to get along, the better it's going to be for her and it's going to be for both of you. And it really changed their perspective of their divorce.
Mhm.
So I've talked to a lot of moms and I've talked to dads about how they transition their children from being married and how they tell the story to their child. And now you're bringing in new people into the relationship. There's a new stepmom or a new stepdad or what have you. And how do you incorporate those people into it? So to your question, I think there's a lot more information out there these days. There's also divorce coaches that are out there that I suggest people who are thinking about it go visit a divorce coach, do some therapy because a lot of times it's not about the divorce. They call themselves divorce coaches, but it's relationship coaches. Like,
Mhm.
are you at a point where you need to get a divorce or can we work it out? And if you do get a divorce, how do we make it as amicable as possible
Yeah.
so that this bickering stops and we put our children first? So yes, I think it's not necessarily the best thing for two people who are not loving and getting along to stay together on behalf of the children. A lot of times it'll be better for the children to have that separation.
Yeah, I'm very mixed about this. As a child, my parents separated when I was two, divorced by the time I was, I guess, four. And I've read a lot of articles about the very deleterious effect on kids even in later life of having not grown up with with an intact family structure. And at the same time, I know there are cases where it's even if there's not physical abuse, there's just a very negative atmosphere in the house day in, day out. That's not
Yep.
fair to the couple or to the kids. And it's hard for me to wrap my head around how much people should suffer through or how much work they should do. I get a lot of it goes all the way back to the beginning. Is like, why did you get married in the first place? What was your commitment there? How hard are you willing to work on doing all this thing even before you decide to have a child in the first place?
Right. Right. And I know with my I have odd parents that had an odd divorce. They got divorced and became best friends.
Hmm.
And my father, still was there for my mother whenever she needed him and vice versa, even though they lived separately and started dating separate people. I introduced my dad to my stepmother, and then my stepmother met my mother, and they became friends, and they're getting their nails done. And it's like, and then our
Yeah,
family events were my stepmother's ex-husband, her kids, my mother, my family, my dad. We had to get one of these big clubhouses to have our events because
that's a modern family.
that was great. My grandmother, who's Eastern European, sat there and said, "Who are these people? Why are they
Right,
here?"
right,
It's like divorces. We don't do this in Europe. Everybody separates. But it was healthy. I suddenly had siblings. I had my sister, of course, but now I had other siblings that came into it, and everybody was getting along and laughing and having a good time. And I think I would love to see more of that because that's a great scenario for children. And I've seen it many times with even with having a foster son. I ended up co-parenting very unexpectedly with the woman who ran the foster program that I was involved with, where she always said, if you need a break, I'll take the kids. This was for anybody. She said, I'll take the kid for a so I needed it was a very bad time and I needed a break. And she took my son for 2 weeks and they really got along. And he ended up staying for another 2 weeks. And then he came to my house and then he would go to her house. And suddenly we realized we were co-parenting. And then we called each other and said, "Do you realize what's going on? We're literally co-parenting this foster child." And it got to a point where she adopted him as his mother and I adopted him as his father.
yeah,
And
yeah. Well,
today we're a family. And it was very unexpected. But it's because he knows to go to her for certain things and to come to me for certain things. And then she and I get on the phone and exchange information. And that's how we've raised the kid. It's unusual, but there's lots of different scenarios to what families look like these days.
that is true.
And it's a healthier environment than two people stick. And I'm not advocating for divorce, even though we have an association catering to that, but we also cater to single families as well. But it's about what's best for the child and what's best for yourself. And staying in the relationship is not always the healthiest thing. And a lot of times when the relationship ends, if you do the hard work, you become a better person and you become a better person for your next mate.
Yeah, I guess the question always is when do you know that it's gone over the line, and when is it better to stay, and when to go,
Yeah,
and when you're in the middle of the marital troubles, they seem like they're going to go on forever, and quite often it's 3 months, it's 6 months, a year, or whatever, and you do figure things out. People who stay together do figure out the ways they get back into intimacy and togetherness and all the rest, despite the fact that there are moments where you can't even imagine going on for another week.
exactly. And I will say, like I said, it took me 14 years. And I remember the last argument we had, I walked out of my house and a voice very loudly in my head said, "Today's the day."
Hmm.
And I immediately responded in my head by saying, "I know." And once that voice said that to me, any affection or love or anything that I wanted to do with that other person had stopped.
Yeah.
Because I did the hard work, I'm now married for 16 years to the love of my life. Um, I've learned how to have a relationship. My husband's learned how to have a relationship. Complacency is huge when it comes to divorces, is that, and children make it very challenging when you're married. I mean, even when our granddaughter comes over and she stays with us, our relationship changes. Like we stop talking as much. It's focused on her. She sucks all the energy out of us every day. Children do that, which is a plus and a minus to be able to sit back and say, well, the child has to be in bed by 7 o'clock so that I can spend time with my partner, and make sure that you have date nights and that you don't lose that spark that brought you together. And realize I cannot get complacent. We are very adamant about making sure we're not complacent and telling each other that we love each other and leaving our notes on the counter in the morning because he goes off to work before I do, or doing something special for each other. You got to keep that going. You got to keep that spark that brought you two together going, even in the mix of the children.
Yeah, I've heard that story many, many times about couples who realized when the child goes off to college, or sometimes even before, but they realize that the only thing that they have in common is just
Was the
their
children.
their conversations about the kid, their attention
Yeah,
with the kids, or the things they do with the kid. And as much as I'm a real big advocate for involved parenting, you have to carve out that time to be alone and still have a real relationship with your partner.
First thing
Hey,
my mother noted when she went to visit my sister in California after she had her second child is, why are these children still up at 9 o'clock at night? And
oh
my
yeah,
sister was like, well, because that's what time they go to bed. She goes, when do you spend time with your husband?
right.
And she went, oh, she said, children need to be in bed at 7. They'll be
Has
fine.
that, do you think that that has changed at all in America? I don't know, for whatever reason I see a lot of TikToks on that are about like disaffection, like uh, people who are just, they just don't want to spend time with their partner. They vacation separately.
Yeah.
They don't like to touch each other anymore. They like, you'd think at this point in time we would have evolved a little bit more to know how important that is back in the day. I mean, you know, men went one way and women went the other way,
Yeah.
and they did have kind of separate lives, even though they were forced to share a house with probably one bathroom. But nowadays, it seems odd that people aren't more aware of how you still need to have like a family story and a you know a
What I
unit.
noticed with my son is that my granddaughter was a distraction. She was the entertainment. She was the reason why they didn't have to talk to each other.
Yeah.
And I would say, why is she still up at 10 o'clock at night? And like, well, when she gets tired, well, no, first of all, children love structure.
Yeah.
So the minute my granddaughter comes to my house and she's in bed, like we have a whole system. Like she comes home, it's dinner time, she goes upstairs, she showers, we watch 2 or 3 cartoons on the couch. We're snuggled up with her. She gets her chocolate leche, that I make. And then she knows it's upstairs, bedtime reading, bedtime story, in bed, 7:30, lights are out. And then
Yeah.
she sleeps all the way till 6:30, 7 o'clock the next morning, and she's great. But at their house, it's a different story. So as a grandparent, it drives me nuts, of course, but I can't say that. Uh, at their house, she's the distraction, the reason why they don't have to communicate with each other. So I think today, in general, our kids are not learning how to socialize because of the internet and because of Facebook and Instagram and all the social sites. You see people walking their, I love when I see people walking their dogs, they're on the phone. When I walk my dog, I don't take my phone. I am
Yeah, you
focused
try
on
to
the
be
dog and I want to see the birds and I want to see
right,
the trees. I'm
right.
on this phone all day. The last thing I want to do is go for a walk with my phone. And what I get from my nephews who are in their mid 20s is they have really had a hard time meeting people. And as somebody who's 60, I have a hard time meeting new people as well. I don't know, and I can't explain it, but I think we've just lost the ability to socialize to some extent. And that comes into a marriage as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You and I didn't have phones growing up. We had to go out and ride the bikes and come home when the sun went down. So we were naturally social beings.
Yeah,
We had friends, and that's what I'm missing to some extent in my own life, is to have that group.
right.
But it just seems harder these days.
Yeah. Are there any specific danger times that that you've seen that are in the? I guess I'm thinking mostly of families with kids, but like when like the newborn years, or when the kids go to school, or when they go to high school, or when they go to college. I know there are a lot of people in my age range. A lot of people are their kids have gone off to college, and now there's a lot of divorces happening. So I know
Right.
that's one. But are there specific time periods that you think are more uh, dangerous or risky for people staying together?
Yeah, I think when you I was going to say when the first child happens, you have to be prepared for the
Yeah,
adjustment.
yeah,
I mean, everybody's so enthusiastic about having a child, which I totally get. It's a beautiful thing. But then comes the responsibility, the time commitments, and everything else that go along with it. What we find is that when people divorce, let's say the woman is an at home mom, and suddenly she has to go back to work, and now that 50% of that responsibility is now placed on the father, who never had that responsibility. Suddenly his life is in turmoil because he has to pick up the kids, but he has to work, but he also has to pick up the kids. Well, welcome to what your partner was going through,
right.
right? And there's an adjustment between that shared responsibility that either does two things. It either makes you bitter, or it makes you appreciate what the other person was doing on your behalf that you were not recognizing. And
Right.
I think we need to be able to recognize that more when we're in the marriage, that as much as we're both working and we have the shared responsibility, it has to be a 50-50. And that 50-50 engagement not only makes your child happier, but it also shows a commitment to your partner that you're in this. And I think a lot of people don't understand that concept. They don't have a license for parenting.
Mhm.
Nobody gives us a manual. And I remember when I got my foster son and I'm sitting around the table with my friends and they're all giving me parenting advice. And I went around the table, said, how many of you guys have kids? And nobody raised their hands. I said, so
Yeah.
you're giving me advice based off of your background, your own childhood background,
Yeah.
which I get, but that's not my kid's background. He's had a horrible background. That's why he's in foster care. So if I'm going to ask parenting advice, I'm going to go to my sister who has two kids. She's going through it just like I am. I'm going to go to her. And I think a lot of people do that when they get into these first children is that what was my childhood like? I grew up in a very a house that was full of discipline, and you got smacked, you got
Mhm.
smacked on the butt, you got smacked in the face, if you got out of line or whatever. So I did not want to raise my child like that. I knew I
Right.
needed to do better. Whereas my parents said we thought we were doing our best, which
Yeah.
I don't think is an excuse because they could see my uncle and my aunt doing the same thing to their kids that they were doing to us, so they could see it. And he would say, "Do you want me to be more like your uncle?" And I'd be like, "No." Well, if you see that, then don't become that. So my
Yeah.
sister and I had to make a concerted effort to raise our children differently because we didn't want to repeat it, and we have great kids. My parents, of course, had great kids. I'm going to speak highly of myself and my sister. We came out pretty good regardless. We have to recognize that when we're in the marriage, how are we going to discipline these children? Are we in agreement with this? How are we going? What are the thoughts about raising this child? What are the plans? And I don't think a lot of people do that when they have
Yeah.
it. They're like, oh, we have a kid, great. Now suddenly you realize your parenting skills are completely opposite, and that causes a lot of discrepancy in the marriage.
Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of us go into that kind of we rely on some structures. If we had gone to church, we use that, or we use ideals and values that we've picked up in philosophy books or novels or TV or the internet or
Right.
whatever. And we kind of put that sort of together in our mind and sort of have a mind meld with our partner and hope it all works out. But I think that you have a lot more chance of success if you do what you're saying is if you have some structure, you have some idea in
A
in
parenting
mind.
plan.
I mean,
Yeah.
I have a whole 12-week program on how to develop these values and how to then institute them in your daily practices and the rituals of your family and everything else, because that's what turns into that commonality within a family. And I think it does what the same thing to kids probably as it does with the partner. If you agree, if you've worked through what are the top 3, 5 values of our family, and you're in
Mhm.
agreement with that with your partner, you've got a better success in the marriage as well.
My sister and brother-in-law went to therapy before they got married, went to
Yep.
marriage
Good
counseling
idea.
before they got married. Because they were very different people. They were in love with each other, but they were very different people. My sister grew up with a family that was an entrepreneur, and my brother-in-law grew up with a family that got a paycheck every 2 weeks. So and same thing with me, by the way. I entrepreneurial background. My husband grew up with a family getting paychecks every 2 weeks. So different. We melded differently together. So
Yeah.
now I've got to figure out when we raise a child, what does that look like?
Yeah.
Based off of my background and his background, and that's what I think people, like you just said, I don't think people think about that. They're like, well, I was brought up with a lot of discipline, so I'm going to discipline my child. But the other one, well, we talked about our feelings and emotions, so maybe we should do that first. Develop a parenting plan. It makes the marriage better, more
Yeah.
cohesive. And
Well, I
if
think
you
there's
can't figure that out, don't have the kids
yeah.
until you do.
There is also a big difference. I mean, we're going all the way back to dating and everything else, but there's a big difference between attraction and love too. I think that
Right.
that people get very confused about, and you can love the way somebody laughs, but that's not the same as sticking with them when the chips are down and
Correct.
it's hard to make it through the day.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
have that commitment. I know what works for us is that, uh, and again, I have mentors that I've looked up to, and when I was younger, I thought I knew everything, and as I got older, I realized I need to look to people that are doing better and have better relationships than I do. So I had a coach, and he has a very successful relationship with his wife, who I think they've been married for 30 years, and he still calls her his bride, which I like. I think that's very sweet. But they sat down and came up with a parenting plan. Every year they sit at the beginning of the year, they come up with a goal sets based off of 5 circles: family, business, financial, spiritual, personal.
Yeah.
And they sit down by themselves, and then they sit down as a couple and come up with what their plans are for the year. They goal set together. So, and they keep it in a place where everybody can see it. The kids can see it, they can see it, so that they're all on the same track. And I
Yeah.
think I know that when I sat down with my ex and said, let's come up with a financial plan, the answer was no, you've got yours and I've got mine, and we're not going to talk about it. And that's why it didn't work. When I met my husband, that was one of the first things I brought up is, how are you with creating financial goals for each other? And how are you on goal setting? And, so what I do is I know what he's trying to achieve. He knows what I'm trying to achieve, and we hold each other lovingly accountable for it. And that really motivates us and keeps us going, because when he succeeds, I want to celebrate. And when I succeed, he wants to celebrate. And that's very important, is that we lose that because we don't have mutual goal sets with
Right.
each other. We just kind of go day to day.
Yeah. 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 Let's talk a little bit about your organization. I'm interested in what the objectives are of the National Association for Single and Divorced Families. I mean, are you trying to help people avoid divorce? Are you trying to treat people or make it easier for people who are in the middle of it or after it? Tell me a little bit more about how
Yes.
you. Yes, all of those, all three.
To all of it. And I'll tell you why. So when you Google divorce, you get about 5 pages of attorneys before you get to
Yeah,
resources.
right.
Okay. And I recognize that. And I thought, well, what if people don't, what if they're contemplating divorce, but don't necessarily think that that's the best outlet? Well, make sure we have resources for that, which is what we do. We have divorce coaches, we have therapists, we have mediators. We want to make sure that your first thought. So NASDF, let me back up. NASDF is the National Association for Single and Divorced Families. We are an umbrella of products, services, support, and resources for people who are considering divorce, getting divorced, or have a single family household. So the easiest way to describe it, everybody knows AARP. We are the AARP for single families and divorced
Okay.
individuals. Okay. So we provide free mental health care. We have career services. We have discounts for real estate services. If you use one of our realtors, we're going to get a referral fee from that realtor. We give that referral fee back to our members, so that could save you, $3 to $5, $7,000 on your closing costs. We have early childhood education discounts for diapers, formulas, computers, school supplies. It goes on and on and on. And as we continue to grow, I call it the Costco effect. The bigger we get, the more retailers and service providers are going to want to use us as an outlet and give our members discounts. So it's always going to be cheaper to come to us to get certain things than if you were to go direct. Okay. And it's only $19 a month. So $19 a month, you get literally, between the mental health care and everything else we give, is at least $5,000 to $7,000 worth of discounts and products and services. Part of that is also resources. We want to be able to provide people with support groups for dad, support groups for mom. Uh, Eventually, I joke that we're going to have a dating site set up so that once you're divorced, we can get you back together.
Right. Makes
We
sense.
know that, 70% second divorces. So what are you going to keep you
You'd
as a
probably
member
be able to
forever?
develop a better questionnaire than Match.com since you'd have different.
Exactly, exactly. And we want people on there who are going to be talking about, I have people
Right.
that talk about having successful relationships,
Yeah. Yeah.
because I realize you're going to get into another one. Let's talk about you having a better successful relationship. So resources like that, therapists, mediators, financial planners, financial analysts, what's the difference? Well, one looks to see what it looks like. I'm not trying to get you to invest. I'm getting to analyze what you have and what you're going to need as a settlement arrangement. So just a ton of stuff on there. And yeah, if you want to hire an attorney, we have those. Somebody came to us one time and said, why don't you have a registry? And I thought, that's brilliant. Like, you need everything when you get a divorce. Why don't you have your friends and family try to help you reestablish yourself in the new place? So we have a divorce registry now as well. On top of that, we also realized that there needs to be some kind of insurance that guarantee your child support and alimony. Right now, if you get a divorce, the only thing that's offered is life insurance. So if you die, you have protection for those children until they're 18 or 21 years old. But what if you don't die? What if you become disabled, or you get downsized from your job due to AI or what have you? Or if you're an entrepreneur and suddenly you have to close your business because of a business bankruptcy, we have Support Insured. It's the only divorce insurance product in the world that guarantees child support and alimony for up to 1 year. If you die, become disabled, involuntarily lose your job, or have to declare business bankruptcy. So it's meant as a stopgap between, hey, I lost my job. I don't want to go back to court and have to refile to say I can't afford to pay you, because that works for the person who's paying. It doesn't work for the person who's receiving. And it usually doesn't take them more than a year to reestablish themselves in a position where they can start paying again. We don't take care of deadbeat parents. That's the state takes care of that. And if you just saw the news,
Yeah, I did. I was going to
you
ask.
can't get a passport now if you owe child support, which I think is great to some extent.
To
It
some
forces
extent.
you to come back to the table. We don't cover for that. But if you literally are downsized, lose your job, or have to close your business, we'll continue making those payments to allow you to get back on your feet. Never before has there been some kind of level of comfort like that for people who are in the process of getting a divorce.
Hmm.
And either party can purchase it. Either the person paying or the person receiving can purchase it.
Yeah. Well, very good. And people can find you at NASDF.com. They don't have to type out the whole
Dot
national
org, dot
.org.
org.
.org.
Yeah, somebody
Yeah.
snagged our .com, but we are a nonprofit, so we are
Right.
.org. Our all of our social sites, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, is all under NASDF.org. So
Okay.
the only difference between our social and our website is that dot in between NASDF and org.
Okay. Great. Well, it's been very interesting. I kind of thought maybe there would be some huge surprises in how things have evolved since I was a child of divorce, or since I last looked at, did a podcast on it. But it sounds like a lot of the themes are still the same. I mean, you got
There's more resources.
more resources. Yeah.
There's more places to go for help. Again, when you're getting a divorce, you feel very lonely. I'll just add real
Yeah.
quick, especially for men, they don't
Yeah.
feel that they have that support team when they get that divorce. You might have taken a lot of your time to spend with her family, and then suddenly those people are gone, or they're her friends, and then suddenly you get divorced, and suddenly you don't have that friendship group. Or if you do have male friends, you don't feel comfortable talking to them about these things,
Yeah.
or their relationships might be in jeopardy because they feel you just got a divorce, so you're going to inspire them to get a divorce. So, I mean, there's a
Yeah.
lot of things that are going on. And now we have those resources. We have those men's groups that are out there. We have those women's groups that are out there to say, hey, we're here. You're not alone. Go for therapy. Don't be afraid to ask for therapy and ask for
Yeah.
help. That's why we have that free mental health care in there.
Yeah.
So that wasn't around when you and I were growing up. And that's what we've helped to establish to
Yeah.
make sure that that support team is there for you.
Well, there are certainly a lot more women who are the major breadwinners too, who are going to be the ones
Absolutely.
paying the alimony or the child support.
Yep.
There are obviously many more gay marriages now than there were
Yep.
when it was not
And
legal.
that statistic I don't have. I will
Yeah.
say that I'm probably going to tell you it's the same with the LGBTQ community. I think a lot of people felt, hey, we got our ability to have a license.
Yeah.
Let's go out and get married, and then realize, wait, what am I doing? Right. So, yeah, I think the stats will be the same, but we have to see what happens with that.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. Well, thank you very much, Ron. I appreciate the time and all the information. Again, NASDF.org.
Yep. And I appreciate you, sir, and I love what you're doing for our community.
All right. Paul Banis at GreatDad.com. Thanks a lot for listening. You can find my coaching offerings at GreatDad.com/go, including a free course on gratitude, which I think is a key ingredient to staying happy every day. Okay, until next time, strong family starts with you. Take care.